if you combine therapeutic fasting, and no, we're not talking about starvation, we're talking about controlled fasting where you're making sure you have all your nutrients, okay? So you're taking supplements and vitamins, because the problem with diabetics is they're very, very deficient in nutrients because they have insulin resistance, so they can't really absorb it. So you'd want to give them nutrients while they're fasting. So therapeutic fasting, while the person's on a low-carb diet, produces some really amazing results, okay? Within 4 months, no need for insulin. So I'm going to put a link down below so you can read the case studies and other studies on this. Decrease in A1C. Decrease in waist size. Number 4, able to control your blood sugars. Now, why does fasting work for diabetes? Simply because it decreases the need for insulin, okay? And if the need for insulin is not there, the pancreas doesn't have to work so hard, so the cells that make insulin finally have a chance to rejuvenate, okay? Because the real problem with diabetes is the high sugar and also the beta cell in the pancreas that produces insulin that's working so hard around the clock to be able to regulate the high glucose that's coming from your diet, okay? So the combination of decreasing the need for insulin by both of these actions right here, low carb and fasting, are extremely therapeutic, versus treating the person with something that increases insulin. Well, now we know why it creates problems, because the side effects from too much insulin are just as bad as too much glucose. So if you are diabetic, I would highly recommend you look into doing therapeutic fasting with a low carb and see if it can work for you.
We need to be fasting for at least 14 hours overnight daily. 16 hours would be better, but at least a minimum of 14 hours without food. That allows your body to balance out the blood sugars. It allows your bowel to rest, to restore, because it needs downtime too. What we need to be doing for life extension, if we have cancer, if we have diabetes, it's a life extension lifestyle is what it truly is.
Well, to make a long story short, over some years I had done 17,500 autopsies on over 454 species of animals and 3,000 human beings for comparison. And what I learned, ladies and gentlemen, was that every animal and every human being that dies of natural causes dies of a nutritional deficiency disease. I'm going to repeat that because that's a very profound observation. Every animal and every human being that dies of natural causes dies of a nutritional deficiency disease. And of course, that was poo-pooed by many medical experts back then, because how could anybody die of a nutritional disease in America, right? There's no evidence to support the claim that we can prevent and cure diseases with vitamins and minerals. Raise your hand if you ever heard some version of that. No evidence to support the claim you can prevent and cure diseases with vitamins and minerals. Doctors say that, experts say that, professors say it, bureaucrats say that, everybody says that. Well, how many of you have ever heard of scurvy? Raise your hand. Sure, you know you can prevent and cure scurvy with vitamin C? How many of you heard of rickets? Raise your hand. You know you can prevent and cure rickets with vitamin D? How many of you heard of goiter? You know you can prevent and cure goiter with iodine and copper and selenium? How many of you heard of anemia? Raise your hand. Golly gee, you know you can prevent and cure anemia with iron and copper and folic acid and vitamin B12? And what about things like beriberi with congestive heart failure? You know you can prevent and cure that with thiamine or vitamin B1? And what about pellagra with all the emotional stuff and schizophrenia and diarrhea and all the skin diseases that go along with pellagra? You can prevent and cure that with vitamin B3 or niacin. And all the essential nutrients are called essential nutrients because if you don't have enough, you get diseases. If you get the disease, you take the nutrient, it goes away. So any doctor, any expert, any bureaucrat, any professor, anybody who says there's no evidence to support the claim you can prevent and cure diseases with vitamins and minerals is a fool. And you don't want to have a fool for a doctor. That's the last person you want to have as a fool as a doctor, right?
I don't want to take too much zinc. So 50 milligrams a day is good, but you want the right form of zinc. A lot of people get the cheap form of zinc. You get a Walgreens zinc sulfate or zinc gluconate, they'll get an upset stomach. That's because that kind of zinc is not well handled by the body. You want zinc picolinate, and you want 50 milligrams a day. There's a few other good forms of zinc, zinc glycinate, zinc monomethionine, but zinc picolinate is really inexpensive. And it's just as effective as any other form of zinc, and you want 50 milligrams a day.
And that's total? Like, we don't have to take into account how much is zinc and how much is picolinate? It's just total value, 50 milligrams zinc picolinate? That's a very good point. No, 50 milligrams of zinc. Okay, so how much zinc picolinate would that be?
They measure it by elemental zinc.
Okay.
When you see 50 milligrams of zinc picolinate, That's the zinc content.
Okay.
It's not, you're right, it's a good point.
It's not always like that in nutrition.
It's not always
right?
like that. It's not always like that. But in zinc picolinate,
like if you see calcium, it'll say 1,000 milligrams, and
it'll
it's
tell
like
you
there's
how
like
much
only a little bit of calcium in it.
You gotta see, it'll say it contains so much elemental calcium.
Okay.
Right? So, and zinc picolinate is, when it says 50 milligrams, that contains 50 milligrams of elemental zinc. All the steroid hormones are produced by skin cells. Most
really?
The skin cell produces steroid hormones. So all of the things that are associated with testosterone, when we talk about testosterone in the skin and we talk about cortisol in the skin, we're not just talking about cortisol that's made in the adrenal glands that goes in the blood. We're talking about local production of testosterone, local production of cortisol in the skin itself. So zinc can help stabilize the processing of testosterone. Zinc is important for the immune system, and zinc also is important for healing. So between vitamin A and zinc, you have your two most important nutrients for dealing with acne. And just those two nutrients alone can help many people at least reduce their acne breakouts, if not completely address them, especially if they're deficient in vitamin A and zinc. And many people, if you're not supplementing, it's very likely you're going to be deficient.
You want to do lab work every 6 months, twice a year, full nutritional profile. And I don't recommend going to your primary care physician to do it because they can't do it. They're handcuffed by health insurance. Yeah, they'll check your liver function and they'll check your kidney function, immune function, blood sugar, because it's attached to revenue streams. Your doctor couldn't tell you what selenium is. They couldn't tell you about EFAs, manganese, chromium, vanadium. They don't know nutrition at all. You have to take care of it yourself. No one's coming to save you, man. As a people, we're very weak. We're not like we used to be. PTSD, anxiety, depression, these are new phenomenons. These are modern issues. Can you imagine a Viking having a panic attack? A barbarian having PTSD, or a Native American being depressed? I ain't got time for that. We're unhealthy and we're weak because we're living in a very minerally deficient society, and now we can't handle stress. We got our fancy little cars, our fancy little suits, our fancy little phones and computers, and we're just not like we used to be. We're weak.
An apple a day keeps the doctor away. What if that's true? You say, well, Mr. Rohn, if that's true, that would be easy to do. Then what's the problem? It's easy not to adopt it as your own personal philosophy. Guy says a Hershey bar a day. Say, no. You've got to be smarter than that. And if you make that kind of an error in judgment every day for 6 years, I'm telling you, it'll accumulate into disaster. Sometimes the first year you say, well, you know, I'm so healthy now, what difference is it going to make? You've got to be smarter than that. Just because disaster doesn't fall on us at the end of the first day doesn't mean disaster isn't coming. You've got to be so smart that you look down the road and say, will the errors in my present judgment, what's that going to cost me in 1 year, 6 years, 1 month, 6 months? I'm telling you, the money cost and the health cost and the success cost is too gigantic if you'll look down the road a little ways and say, are there errors in my current judgment like an apple versus a Hershey bar?
Well, in 1997, a study by the Health Insurance Association of America found that 75% of insurance fraud, which is a federal crime, is committed by providers, which is a code word for doctors. This was an anonymous survey, so 58% of the doctors responding to the survey felt comfortable enough to admit that they lied to get insurers to pay for procedures they don't even do. A Senate committee, U.S. Senate committee, accuses companies of gaming Medicare. They're talking about home health services, they're talking about hospitals and emergency rooms, they're talking about clinics where there's multiple doctors in a clinic. And basically what happens is this: if you go in there for a strain and your ankle's all puffed up and black and blue because you got some blood in there and everything is painful, they'll take an x-ray and they'll say, you know, we need to have an expert look at this because we're just not quite sure. So we're going to check you into the hospital tonight. Instead of sending you home with an ice pack on your ankle and have you see your doctor tomorrow, we're going to put you in the hospital. Oh my gosh, we need to put you in a CAT scan because we have to see if there's microfractures in there. And they take something that should have been a $200 bill to $40,000 because you have insurance, you have Medicaid, you have Medicare. And these doctors, they've learned in the Senate committee, will bill 8 different agencies to pay them for doing the one service. They bill everybody they can and get paid by 8 different services for doing one thing on you. Now that's fraud. Now you do that, you go to jail, but they get a walk. Doesn't that make you feel warm and fuzzy? You're supporting the medical community?
Now, this is from the editorial page of the Washington Post, Washington, D.C., November 2nd, 1992. Lining docs' pockets. If you go to a doctor, your doctor, you want him to think of you as a patient, not a cash cow. But 2 studies in this month's New England Journal of Medicine shows that doctors are out to milk you dry. And if you're from a farm, you know what that means, what a cash cow is. 10 months later in the Reader's Digest, very interesting article of September 1993, and to me the Reader's Digest is the sweetest little magazine that ever was. Never says anything negative about anyone or any individual or any group, and so I was really surprised to see this. And on page 77 it says, can you trust your doctor? And it lists 12 ways that doctors routinely scam patients. I'll give you the worst one. You can go look up the other 11. September 1993. The worst one, according to Reader's Digest, not me, the average doctor in America gets $421 in kickbacks every time he refers somebody in for a CAT scan or an MRI. And you thought doctor loved you when he said, you know, we've been fighting that bursitis in that shoulder for 5 years and giving you heroic injections of cortisone in there and it's just getting worse. Let's, you know, you've got good insurance and you've got good Medicare supplement, it's not going to cost you anything. Let's run you in and see if that bursitis is really arthritis. Cha-ching, $421. According to Reader's Digest, not Joel Wallach, the average doctor in America gets $226,681 a year. Almost $250,000 in CAT scan kickbacks. And you wonder why health care costs keep spiraling upwards.
This came out in September of 1997. It was an article published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Young doctors lack stethoscope skills, which is, you know, the primary instrument of a doctor. Many new doctors steeped in high-tech medicine can't properly use a stethoscope. What they learned was they could just identify 20% of heart problems that were presented to them. They could not identify 80%. So how can you go to school for 14 years and not use a stethoscope? It's like an apprentice carpenter apprenticing for 7 years. How can you not learn how to use a hammer, right? Well, the reason why doctors don't spend any time learning how to use a stethoscope is because if they were to use a stethoscope to diagnose cardiovascular problems, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, you can identify all cardiovascular problems with a stethoscope. It takes you an extra 10 minutes to listen to every square millimeter of the heart and the valves and the arteries and things, but you can do it, gain the skills to do it, but then you make an extra $30 for a long office visit. But if they send you in for an angiogram or a CAT scan or an MRI or an ultrasound, guess what? They make $421 every time they send somebody in for those procedures. What's better, $421 or $30? In any particular instance, with 15 minutes of reading, you can do whatever a doctor does. It's that simple. For instance, a doctor has less than $100 worth of stuff in his examining room. He's got a blood pressure cuff, a stethoscope, he's got a thermometer, a little rubber mallet to see if you have reflexes. Well, if you walk in the examining room, I know you got reflexes. They have a little AAA battery pen light, you know, they look in your eyes and down your throat with. And that was given to them by some salesman for a pharmaceutical company. You can jerk it out of their pocket and look at it, and you'll say, oh, look at that, Pfizer. So they have less than $100 worth of stuff. You can go to a pharmacy or a grocery store and buy all that stuff yourself without a prescription. With the exception of ultrasound and radiation and CAT scans and MRIs, you can get just about any test that a doctor would send you to a lab or a hospital for. For instance, you can go and you can buy a little bottle of test strips to find out what your blood sugar and blood cholesterol is. You can get little test strips to find out if you have blood or sugar in your urine. You can get test strips to find out if you have blood in your bowel movement to do a screen for colon cancer and ulcerative colitis and maybe gastric ulcers. You can find out if you're pregnant or not. For $19.95, you can get a little test strip, you pee on it, and you find out if you're pregnant or not. 30 seconds, honey, I'm pregnant. You don't have to go get a physical exam, get a blood test, they charge you $150, and then you got to come back in 3 days for another $150 visit, so it winds up being like $500 to find out if you're pregnant or not. You can do it for $19.95. Well, they want you to believe that they are the holders of all knowledge in this. Well, back when I was a kid, my dad, only 60 years ago, my dad only had a 4th grade education, and he knew how to artificially inseminate cattle back then. So when a doctor starts telling you how technical this stuff is, you can just sort of smile at him and say, okay, doc, let's move forward here.
This happens to be from the front page of the USA Today, and what this study said was this. 70% of the doctors who treat Medicare patients flunked the exam on how to prescribe to the elderly safely and effectively. 70% flunked the exam. Now, what would happen to American Airlines if 70% of their pilots flunked the exam on how to fly? What would happen to American Airlines if they killed 300,000 passengers a year? You see all this big hoo-ha going on over the Value jet where they killed 109 people, right? Now, the reason why this difference is this. When a jet goes down and splatters parts of people's bodies, you know, say 200 passengers over a hillside or a swamp, it's pretty hard to hide, and so, you know, it's a kind of a gruesome thing. But in the medical profession, it's more subtle than that. Obviously, if doctors were to line up cancer patients and and AIDS patients and people with diabetes along the wall and mow them down with a machine gun to save money for treatment, then people would protest because that's very blatant. But here's one of the many examples that Ralph Nader gave as to why this is missed, because people are busy with their lives. You have kids and grandkids, you have jobs and things to do, and so you're not going to sit there and kind of keep an eye on things. You assume that somebody else is doing it. Well, here's what Ralph Nader said. 32,000 hip fractures each year in America are attributed to prescriptions or prescribing by medical doctors that leaves the elderly sedated and unbalanced. And they fall over and fracture a hip, trying to avoid stepping on the kid or getting out of the tub, getting out of the car. And this is a death sentence for 29,000 of these people. Remember, 75% over the age of 65 don't live 90 days. They die of complications, pneumonia, stroke, and pulmonary embolism and others. And I believe that doctors should be held responsible for this just the way that bartenders are when they let people drink too much and drive home and kill somebody else or themselves. And there's manslaughter and second-degree murder and wrongful death, however, whatever applies to that case. Now, there is an organization called MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, because there's 15,000 Americans every year killed by drunk drivers. I believe they should redirect their energies towards physicians, because physicians, according to Ralph Nader, kill 300,000 Americans a year, and they don't even have to change their towels or their letterhead. They could keep their initials, MAD, just change their name to Mothers Against Dumb Doctors. One of my favorite surveys, it was done by Harvard Medical School, was published in 1972. And what they did was look at the drug use, both the illegal street drug use and the illegal use of prescription drugs by medical doctors on themselves on a weekly basis. And what they found out was pretty shocking. They found out that 52% of licensed medical doctors in America use psychotropic drugs on themselves each and every week. This included cocaine, marijuana, speed, barbiturates, opium derivatives, and things like fentanyl. So what that means is if you choose to go to a doctor for every little thing when you leave here tonight, don't be too excited about their degrees and certificates and licenses hanging on the wall. What you want to do is very carefully look at the pupils of their eyes and see if they're gorked out on something before you let them examine you or prescribe to you or do any kind of procedure. Even scarier to me is that 78% of the medical students in America use psychotropic drugs on themselves illegally each week. And down deep in your heart, do you really believe that when they graduate school and go out and practice, do they quit using drugs? No, they can get the good stuff now because they're making money, right?
Mildred C. Clark, 86 years old, was found cold, stiff, and blue on her apartment floor. And the apartment manager got scared because he thought she was dead, so he called the paramedics and they examined her. Yeah, she's dead. And so they called the coroner. He came out. Yeah, she's dead. So they put her in a body bag and shipped her to the Albany, New York Medical Center, which was associated with a medical school there in upstate New York. And so they sent an intern down to do the final exam before they wrote a death certificate on her, because you can't do an autopsy on somebody until they've had a death certificate. So he examines her, and he probably just closed his eye. He'd probably never seen a dead body by himself, right? So everybody else says she's dead, so he writes his death certificate. They take her down to the morgue, and they strip her naked, take a pressure hose, blow all her makeup and gunk off her body, put her wet, naked body into the body bag, and they put her in a freezer for 90 minutes until the medical examiner and the pathologist get there to do the autopsy. 90 minutes after being in the freezer, they wheel her out and zip open the body bag, and Mildred C. Clark, 86 years old, sits up. She says, "Thank God you found me. It was cold and dark in there, and I didn't know where I was." I mean, after 14 years of medical school, doctors can't even tell if you're alive or dead. That makes me nervous. According to Ralph Nader, in January of 1993, big study, according to Ralph Nader, doctors kill each year in America 300,000 patients in hospitals alone each year as a result of medical negligence. 300,000 are killed each year in hospitals alone as a result of medical negligence. Each year in America, 1.3 million Americans are injured in hospitals as a result of medical negligence. Each year in America, 2 million are infected in hospitals alone as a result of medical negligence. And despite heroic round-the-clock nursing care and intravenous antibiotics, 90,000 to 100,000 of these 2 million each year die. In hospitals each year, 2.2 million people get what's called adverse drug reactions to the drugs that they are introduced to in the hospital. And despite heroic measures, 140,000 to 200,000 die every year. You add these up, ladies and gentlemen, that's 3.5 million to 4 million casualties killed, injured, and infected each year in hospitals by doctors each year. 3.5 million to 4 million killed, injured, and infected each year in hospitals by doctors. It's estimated to be double that outside of hospitals. Now, we're not talking about 3 people a year here. We're talking about a huge number of people. So Why do we go to doctors for health and longevity information?
When Albert Einstein died at 76 of something that a turkey wouldn't die from. He went to Stanford Medical School for treatment. He was on the Department of Physics there at Stanford University, Northern California. He died of a copper deficiency, which caused a ruptured aortic aneurysm. He bled to death in seconds at age 76. There's about 20 different ways you can die from a copper deficiency, all of which we eliminated in turkeys in 1947, 13 years before he died. Now, the first outward sign of a copper deficiency is white, gray, and silver hair. I see a lot of copper deficiency in his room tonight. Coloring your hair, ladies, doesn't count. It's still white, gray, and silver underneath. You're still at risk. Now, if you don't die suddenly when your hair starts turning gray, it could be 2 years old, doesn't matter of age, it has nothing to do with age. You begin to get a breakdown of the elastic fibers and collagen and connective tissue in your body, and your face looks like you've been run over by a Hummer. Kind of like Albert Einstein there. Now, if he were to go to a plastic surgeon, would he get Botox and a facelift, or would he get copper? He'd get Botox and a facelift, wouldn't he? Well, if you don't die suddenly then, you get a breakdown of the elastic fibers from a copper deficiency and collagen and connective tissue in your blood vessels. You start getting spider veins, varicose veins, and hemorrhoids. Hemorrhoids are nothing but varicose veins in a funny place. That's all that hemorrhoids are. They're just varicose veins in a funny place. Now, some of you are like me, are old enough to remember those old black and white silent newsreels. They dun dun dun, dun whatever before the movies, you know, in the old days, in the late 40s, right after the Second World War. I remember seeing pictures of Albert Einstein walking down the halls of Stanford University with an armload of books and papers, you know. Ow, ow, oh, ow, oh, ow, ow, oh, ow, ow. That's because he had hemorrhoids. He had hemorrhoids hanging down to his knees. You can tell by looking at his face. With a face like that, I guarantee you he had hemorrhoids hanging down to his knees. And then he got a breakdown of the elastic fibers in his aorta, and he had a ruptured aortic aneurysm, and he bled to death from a copper deficiency, something a turkey wouldn't die from. This guy, George Francis, died at 112. In December of 08, when he died, he was the oldest man in America, one of the oldest men in the world. Now, he's illiterate. Here's his daughter reading the newspaper to him. He's a black fellow living out in the swamps, Louisiana. He was living on crawdads and catfish and onions and peppers and all that kind of stuff. No doctors, illiterate. Didn't have a job. He's out there trapping muskrats and things like that, right? And no doctors, no clinics. And he was born in 1896, and he lived through 19 U.S. presidents. He lived through 19 U.S. presidents. Now, remember, every U.S. president had at least one university degree. Many of them had 2 and 3. Very wealthy people usually, but they had lots of education. The doctors who take care of presidents are not the local country bumpkin doctor. The doctors who take care of presidents are very prestigious. They have 3 or 4 degrees. These people have been heads of departments. They did a lot of research projects. I mean, these are very well-respected doctors. With all that, the average lifespan of U.S. presidents, taking JFK out, who's assassinated in his 40s, take him out of there, the average lifespan of U.S. presidents is 75. There's an illiterate swamp rat eating crawdads, not worrying about his cholesterol. He lives to be 112. Begs the question, what's more important, good medical care, expensive medical care, or raw materials? Raw materials will win. As we go through this, you'll see that raw materials will win every time. Raw materials will win every time. Now, when he died, the reporters asked his daughter, what did your daddy do to live to be 112? And she said, he broke all the rules of healthy eating with a diet heavy on dairy, eggs, and lard sandwiches. For those who don't know what a lard sandwich is, it's made from pig fat. L-A-R-D, pig fat. He ate nothing but dairy, eggs, and pig fat sandwiches, along with his crawdads and onions and garlic and peppers. Now remember, he's a Cajun, he's a Creole. He's eating like the French, who ranked 3rd in longevity. So he's eating like the French. He didn't lower his cholesterol. He stayed away from doctors. He didn't even know there was such a thing as cholesterol. And he lived to be 112. And Ronnie Reagan got Alzheimer's disease, following the doctor's instructions. Everybody in this room, I don't care if everybody in your family has died at 53, you have the genetic capacity to live well beyond 100, but you're going to have to work at it. The ability to live well beyond 100 is only a potential. It's a genetic potential. Human beings can live well beyond 100. But you're not going to accomplish it just doing whatever doctors say. Just eat well, get everything you need. That's not going to work. So let's look at billionaires. They can afford the best doctors. They can hire the entire medical training staff of every medical school in the United States to come in and take a splinter out of their finger, right? Whatever the doctor says, they can hire the best chef, get the best food. So let's see how well billionaires do following the doctor's instructions. Forbes magazine, 2004, came up with a survey. They wanted to know what kills billionaires. They were looking for a BD, a billionaire's disease. What they found out was that billionaires, and they use the word killed, billionaires are killed by the same unglamorous things that kill the rest of us. That's because they use the same doctors we do. The average lifespan of a billionaire, according to this Forbes survey, is 78. The average lifespan of a falling down red wine drunk from Missoula, Montana, is 75. You don't gain anything in health and longevity by being a billionaire and having access to information and expensive doctors. There's never been a billionaire who lived to be 100. There has never been a billionaire who lived to be 100, and they can afford the best and most expensive medical care there is. And here's this illiterate swamp rat from Louisiana who lives to be 112.
Olive oil is bad?
All of it. It's not that the actual oil is bad. It's that it gets exposed to the air.
Okay, and it's ineffectual?
It becomes oxidated, right? If you cut an apple open and you leave it on your counter, what
yeah,
happens?
it turns brown.
Right, that's
Same
oxidation.
with avocado.
Right, that's oxidation. So oil is exposed to oxygen a lot, and then it gets thrown in a glass bottle, and then it goes on some truck somewhere, and it travels all over the country, and then you buy it. You don't even know how long it's on the grocery store shelf. Then you buy it and put it on your shelf. At this point, it could be 3 years old, and it's completely oxidated, and that's free radical damage.
Oh, did you know that there's 12 companies that make cholesterol-lowering drugs in America, 12 pharmaceutical companies? Each one of them makes a profit every month of $2 billion to $5 billion. Each one of these 12 companies makes $2 to $5 billion profit every month in America because you are so paranoid about cholesterol. Well, with all that, in that same 10-year period, we dropped from 17th in longevity to 24th. The system sucks. The recipe sucks. That's an F minus, 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 minus. Now here's what even makes it worse. Listen up here. This is what makes it worse. There's not a single disease that is caused by elevated blood cholesterol and triglycerides. People even stopped chewing their gum when I said that. They were so shocked. There's not a single disease that you can show me that is caused by elevated blood cholesterol and triglycerides. You've wasted your time, money, and energy worrying about your cholesterol. There's not a single disease that's caused by elevated blood. Show me one. There isn't one. If you read the words carefully, they say elevated blood cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease. It doesn't cause it. It's a risk factor. Now, let me tell you. If you have elevated blood cholesterol, whatever that means, and I'll give you a rationale here in a second for that statement. If you have elevated blood cholesterol, it means you either have diabetes or you have low thyroid, hypothyroidism. You can have deficiency or ratio problems between omega-3s, 6s, and 9s. You can have deficiencies of chromium and vanadium, which are two trace minerals that control blood fats and blood sugar. You can have deficiencies of niacin. Remember, the health food industries and little health food store owners and herbalists and naturopathic doctors and all these people have been yelling about niacin forever for lowering cholesterol, right? Well, the doctors, medical doctors, oh, that's all quackery and charlatanism. That can't be. Well, now the pharmaceutical industry came out with Niaspan, which is just a time-release niacin, vitamin B3, time-release, and they charge your insurance company $150 for one little bottle, and you can buy about the same number of capsules of niacin for $8. Are you getting a picture here, folks?
Study finds doctors skip key steps of treatments. Doctors fail to take about half the recommended steps for treating common illnesses, such as high blood pressure and diabetes, suggesting that healthcare in the United States isn't nearly as good as many people thought. Well, that's not a new belief, right? This came out in October of 1999. Doctors say they'd lie to get insurers to pay. This is a study done in 8 cities, 169 internists, and they presented this to the annual meeting of the American Medical Association annual conference in Los Angeles in October of 1999. And I'm just going to go over 2 of them. This was actually quite a thick report. I'll go over 2 of them. It said 58% supported lying, so a severely ill 55-year-old could get a coronary bypass, even though her pains were not becoming more frequent as the insurer required during the managed care days. Now, if your pains are not becoming more frequent and the degree of pain remains the same, this is called stable angina. And how many of you heard of nitroglycerin? Yeah, for 30, 50 cents treatment, you can put a nitro tab under your tablet. It may cost you $6 to $10 a month to deal with the pain. And as long as the frequency is the same, the pain level is the same, you can do that forever. And also, how many of you heard of Dean Ornish? Well, Dean Ornish was an MD, PhD from Harvard Medical School. He did a great double-blind study where he took hundreds of people with 85%, 90% blockage of their 3 main coronary arteries, and he put them on a restricted diet, gave them some supplements, gave them low-impact exercise like yoga and swimming, and in 6 months' time, all their arteries were open 100% without surgery. This was impossible according to surgeons. The only way to deal with blocked arteries in the heart is to do a bypass, right? There's no way you can do that with diet and exercise and supplements. And so they made him do it again. Another double-blind study worked, results exactly the same. Well, what a doctor should say today when somebody comes to them with angina, say, look, let's get on a Dean Ornish program. It's actually going to cut your food bill in half, save a little money here. We're going to get you on a little nutritional program, supplement program, do some yoga. You can do that for free at home. Well, here's a $10 tape. You can learn how to do these yoga exercises. You come back in 6 months, and if you're improved, we'll just keep doing the same thing. If it gets worse, then we'll consider the surgery. But there's no doctors who do that. Doctors kind of lie a little bit, but they want you, well, worse than that, they want God to believe that they're lying on behalf of Mabel or Ruth or Roy. He says, Lord, you know I'm lying, but it's not because of me. I'm lying because the mean old managed care insurance companies won't let Roy have a triple bypass. And Roy needs a triple bypass, so forgive me, Lord, because I have to lie for Roy. Now, why is that doctor lying? Is he lying for Roy's behalf? No, he's lying for his own behalf. He wants $85,000. Keep that cash flow going.
Procter & Gamble in the 1930s gave the American Heart Association $1.7 million. And in return, the American Heart Association, which at that point in time was a struggling professional organization. In return for the $1.7 million, the American Heart Association's job was to say that Crisco is healthy and that butter and animal fats are not. Why? Because Procter & Gamble sold Crisco, which originally was intended as an automobile lubricant. So now all of a sudden, millions of Americans are throwing their butter away, throwing their lard away because of faulty research that nobody questioned.